Okay, so Shane, don't worry. It's still my church, okay? We're still talking about my church. And I'm not going to do this because it would be mean. I was going to ask everyone, well, what do you remember from last week's talk on Shane's? Because I wasn't here. I wasn't here last week. But I did watch it on YouTube. I was a good boy. And I watched it on YouTube. And it was brilliant, okay? So it was brilliant. And Shane said, we're doing a series. And we're sort of going to go from small to big. And so Shane talked about sort of my family last week. Is that right? Phew. Then Shane asked me to talk about, well, okay, so from our sort of, if you like, immediate family, our children, etc., let's talk about the sort of church community. Sorry, I'm not going to talk about that this morning. I'm going to go smaller in a way. Okay, I'm going to go to the fact that my church, this is what Jesus says. Jesus says, my church, you're mine. I want to explore what it means to be Jesus's this morning. Jesus says to each one of us as his church, but also on an individual, this is why I'm going smaller, this is more on an individual level, you're mine. And we're going to explore that this morning. So Shane talked about this. I loved this. I've not really heard of this before, and this was sort of revelatory to me. This idea of my mentality, having this my mentality, is different. If something is yours, then your mentality about that thing is different. And so Shane came up with a few examples. I think I've got these right. When it's mine, we treat it differently. Okay, so Shane talked about his Ginger Ninja. Does anyone know what his Ginger Ninja was? No one knows. Oh, shame. Oh, his car. Well done, everyone. Okay, and the fact that his Ginger Ninja was his, he would treat it differently. Okay, now, this might be why you don't or shouldn't maybe buy hire cars, because people who's, when they hire a car and it's not theirs, they might not treat it with as much care as perhaps you would treat your own car. So when it's yours, you will treat it differently. When it's mine, it becomes personal. So, actually, my Hannah has renamed, well, not renamed, has named. I don't usually name a car, but apparently my little Skoda Fabia is called Jakob. Okay, because I think it was the only name she could think of, which began with a Y, which is the first letter of the registration plate. I didn't like to tell her that actually Jakob starts with a J, but there we go. I've actually got a lad in my class called Jakob, but there we are. But it becomes personal. Okay, if your house is yours, you can, make it personal. You can put your pictures up, etc., etc. If it's mine, we can change it. So, for instance, if it is our house, we can make changes that we want to make. We can change it. Shane mentioned the fact that if you went to a hotel room, you wouldn't necessarily change the pictures on the wall because it's not yours to change. So, if it's mine, we can change it. When it's mine, we take responsibility for it. And Shane talked about the fact that, if we make a mess, I remember him saying to John Rathbone, if I spill the coffee, I wouldn't ask John to pick it up, but maybe I would. And if our children make a mess, so if there's a mess in our home, we would take responsibility and we would clear it up most of the time. And I suppose the secret's going to be, can we get our children to think of this as their home and take responsibility? I don't think that's ever going to happen. But they're our children, so we take responsibility for them and we clear up their mess, which I suppose is a very good analogy of what God does for us. But moving on, when it's mine, we care for it more. We care for it more. So, what I want to say this morning is when we care for it more, we care for it differently, we take responsibility, and Jesus has a my mentality for each one of us. We are his. We are his. Let that sink in. And I want to explore this morning how he has achieved this and what it means for us. I'm going to take you back to the 1980s. Okay, so in the 1980s, I was 17 in 1988. And when I was 17 in 1988, John Glyde introduced me to something which you might think, thank goodness this seems to have disappeared. You might not even realise this ever existed. But John Glyde introduced me to Christian heavy metal. Andy remembered Christian heavy. Can anyone tell me a Christian heavy metal band apart from Andy? Because he obviously. Pete. Okay, never heard of it. Yeah, Striper. Here we go. Do you want to know what Striper looked like in the 1980s? Look at that. Come on. We need to reintroduce this. Whoa. That was the 1980s, everyone. How did that ever happen? Okay. Another Christian band, which John Glyde quite liked, was Bloodgood. Look at those guys. They look a bit more heavy metal, don't they? That's not quite, I don't know. Is that heavy metal? Not sure. That definitely looks heavy metal. But there was one song, okay, which I am going to play you, by this band Whitecross. Okay, don't worry, it's not heavy, well, it is heavy metal, but it's a ballad, okay? So you're not going to get your ears injured when I play this song for you in a second. And this song really helped me in those dark times. And when Shane was talking about my mentality, it sort of took me back to the 1980s when, I was going, as a sort of teenager, you go through these times when things just seem to all get on top of you and it's very difficult to get a right perspective on things. And this really helps. I'm just going to play this, okay? The words are going to come up. I think the words are quite powerful. And just enjoy, if you can, if it's heavy metal. But here we go. Ready? There's a certain power I found in that. Just remember just one thing. Jesus says to you, Jesus says to me, you're mine. You know, I love that chorus. When we're feeling down with darkness all around, Jesus says to you, Jesus says to me, remember just one thing. You're mine. Why is that so powerful? Well, I think it's to do with this idea of this my mentality. So if we are Jesus's, then, you know, when we, if you like, get something, usually we will purchase it. So if we really are Jesus's, that means he has purchased us. And how do you know he has purchased us? Well, in Revelation 5:9, it says, and they sang a new song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. Now, we're not just purchased. We have been redeemed. So what's the difference? Well, we were once already God's. You know, God created us. But as the Genesis story tells us, you know, we decided we wanted to be our own gods. We, if you like, chose not to be gods anymore. That makes sense. Yeah, so I sort of I could mean two things. So we chose not to be, if you like, gods belonging to God. Thank you, Simon. We chose not to belong to God anymore because we wanted to be our own gods. And in doing so, we gave up the authority that God had given us to rule the earth. We gave up our, if you like, our sonship, our daughtership. We gave up our right to be heirs to God's kingdom. And we handed that over to Satan. And that's why there is now that possibility of there being darkness all around. And so we were once gods. We have chosen not to be gods and gone our own way. And so we needed to be redeemed. And this is what Jesus has done. So what does being redeemed mean? Well, this is the dictionary definition. And I haven't changed anything on this definition. All right, this is exactly as it came out of one of the dictionaries online. So the definition of redeemed is this: to buy back, to be repurchased. So Jesus has bought us back. He has repurchased us. To get or win back. Jesus has won us back. He has won the victory to get us back, to get us to be his once again. And this is I was amazed that this was in the dictionary: to free from what distresses or harms us, such as to free from captivity by payment or ransom. Jesus says, I have come to be a ransom for many. To extricate or help to overcome something detrimental. To release from blame or debt. To clear that blame or that debt. To free from the consequences of sin. God saw us in our slavery to sin under Satan's authority, and he did not just leave us in that state. He loved us enough, as John 3:16 says, to send his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. So, what does that mean? Galatians 4 explains it. What I am saying is that as long as an heir is underage, he is no different from a slave. So Paul is sort of using the analogy of us in our state before Jesus came. We were heirs. We've given away our authority, or we didn't have the authority of an heir. Although he owns the whole estate, the heir is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. And he goes on to explain, so also, when we were underage, we were in slavery under the elemental spiritual forces of the world. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem, to buy back, to win back, to repurchase those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. We might become heirs again, because you are his sons. God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. You are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. So, Jesus, we are his because he has repurchased us. But that came at a cost. When we buy something, it usually is going to cost us. And the more expensive it is, the more we're going to look after it in general, which is why I never buy a brand new car. Okay? Because what's going to, who's going to put the first scratch on that car? It's devastating, even the oh no, look. We would look after it with a lot more care if it's cost us more. The more something is worth to us, the more we're going to be committed to it, the more we're going to stop it getting damaged, the more we're going to maintain it, the more we're going to look after it. The most precious thing, usually, is going to be, your own children. And, God says, you are my child. You are worth it. Well, how much were we worth? So what was the cost that Jesus paid? How valuable did he deem us to be? So if we read from Hebrews 2, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. You know what? Jesus paid the full price. There was no discount. There was no sale. Jesus paid the full price to buy us back. Satan wasn't going to put us on offer. He became fully human. He was conceived in Mary's womb. He was born. He went through childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. He had a trade. He was part of society. He had friends and he had enemies. Life happened to him, just as life happens to all of us. That's a polite way of putting it, by the way. He was tempted in every way. He was betrayed. He was abandoned. He was unjustly convicted, and he was murdered in the most gruesome, painful way. And so he also experienced death. He paid the full price. He became fully human to pay the full price. He values each one of us. He values his church that much that he was willing to pay everything he had. So he did all this so he could redeem, he could buy back all of us, every part of our lives. And it cost him everything, all of him, all of his life. And that's just a measure of the worth he places on each one of us. So if we're that valuable, how much does Jesus care for us? How much does he love us? how much does he want to protect us, keep us from being damaged, look after us, grow us, keep us working properly? How much does he not want to see us go back into the old habits and the old ways and go back into slavery? How much does he desire that reconnection with him? How much does he desire his Spirit to be living within us? How much does he desire to, if you like, have that, give us his authority once again, that we can actually live in victory with him? Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. You know, Jesus didn't sort of get his credit card out and just sort of, oh, well, there you go. How often do, you sort of you need to buy something, you just get the credit card. Don't even realise how much it's costing. In some ways, the value of money, actually handing over £20 notes, sort of makes you realise a bit more than, well, it's just a number on a screen, ding, contactless. You don't even have to put it in or put your PIN in these days. It's amazing how easy it is to spend money and not realise the cost. Jesus paid the full price. And he went through all of human experience, and he paid the full cost. And because he was tempted in every way, he knows us. He has experienced everything we experience. And so he can come alongside us, and we can walk with him in the victory he has won over death, over sin, and the devil. And we can be confident that we are his, because he has bought us and he has paid the full price. There is nothing Satan can say, sorry, there's a little bit here you haven't paid for, because Jesus has paid it all. I'm just going to read Galatians 4 again. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. Because you are his sons, God sent the Spirit of his God into our hearts, and the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. And since you are his child, God has made you also an heir. We are co-heirs with Christ because he has brought us back. And we're going to come and we're going to take communion. And Shane's going to come and lead communion in a second. But, communion is that remembrance that Jesus says to you and Jesus says to me, you're mine. Remember that. Remember, as he says, this is my body broken for you. This is the cost I paid to redeem you, to buy you back. Jesus says to me, you're mine. This is my blood poured out for you. This is the blood of the new covenant, of the victory I am going to win and I have won over death, over sin, over the devil, that you no longer need to be a slave to these things, but you can rise in victory with me and have that resurrection life that I am going to win as I defeat these and have risen and am still alive today. As this blood is poured out for you, I have purchased, I have redeemed you. Come and eat of me. Come and drink of me. Remember, you're mine. Remember, you are mine. So as we take communion, I'm just going to leave those words up. Remember just one thing. Jesus says, you're mine. Amen.